That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. You're going to be hearing that phrase a lot over the next 3 months because we're coming up on the 50th anniversary of the moon landing. Now, I know what you're thinking. This woman remembers the moon landing and she's still teaching. I ask you to consider that Joe Biden will be here to kick off his campaign on Monday, and he's 76. If I were running for president, you wouldn't even question that I'm still at. But I do remember the moon landing, and I remember the STEM education that we had leading up to it. We didn't call it STEM, but we had 2 hours of math classes a day and homework that would take us till 1 in the morning. It was our patriotic duty to beat the Russians to the moon. None of us was sure what would actually happen if we didn't make it to the moon first, but we knew it would be bad. My dad built a bomb shelter in the backyard. Now, in a surreal move, this was a very flat area of Syracuse, New York. He took the dirt from the shelter and formed a hill on the top of the bomb shelter so that all the children of the neighborhood could go sledding in the wintertime. Bizarre imagery. But I became obsessed with technology at that time, as particularly with the idea of the human connection to it. And by the way, if Neil Armstrong had not been aboard Apollo 11 as a human being, there would not have been a successful moon landing. Computers had figured out the exact landing site. Computers were landing the lunar module, it was coming down, but what they had not counted on was all the dust that would be kicked up with the retro rockets. So as it came down, he thought he noticed a big rock just about where this lander was supposed to be guided to by the computer. And had it actually landed on the rock, it would have tipped over and they never would have made it back home. So he took it upon himself to take manual control, and even though he could no longer see exactly where he was landing, he guided that lander over to a spot where he felt, oh, is this not working? Oh, I'm sorry, okay. Is this on now? Yeah. I'm sorry, I didn't know I wasn't tech. There we go. So Neil Armstrong guided the lander over to a spot where it then did safely land, but just with seconds of fuel left to spare. If he had not landed when he did, then it would have run out of fuel and they would have had another accident. So we needed that connection between human beings and technology. And thus began my interest in bringing that out, not only for myself, but for my students once I became a teacher. So I began to ask students, no matter what subject I was teaching, I even made them discuss it in French when I taught French here, what does it mean to be human? How do we distinguish a human being from a really, really smart animal or an excellent AI system? I ask you now to take about 10 seconds, shut your eyes, and come up with your answer. How is a human being different from an algorithm, from a robot, from a really smart animal? Now, when I asked this of my middle schoolers, one of the first things they came up with was the idea of emotions. That people have emotions that go beyond just anger and happiness that an animal might feel. How many of you have a dog or have ever had a dog? And how many of you know this look? Guilt. I used to walk into my house and say to my dog, "What did you do?" And instantly there was that guilty feeling. Pretty sophisticated emotion. So I don't think that emotions alone would distinguish us from being an animal compared to being a human being. There needs to be more. And they're working on robots now that can mimic human expression, algorithms that will allow them even to tell jokes or recognize when a joke is being told. So the next students would tell me would be, how about language, the ability to communicate in language? And you've probably seen Coco, the gorilla, known for sign language. And Coco couldn't talk, but certainly she could use sign language and even come up with original ideas, things that she hadn't been taught. She put together her own words. They found prairie dogs can actually warn other prairie dogs about human beings coming, right down to the level of saying man in blue shirt compared to man in red shirt with the few colors they can see. So language wasn't enough to distinguish us. So I began to work with students and came up with a course, they still do a version of it for Couch, that we call Brave New World. What does it mean to be human? And to start that, we spoke about face transplants. Now, the first time I talked about a face transplant was 15 years ago. And my teaching partner, after I introduced it, because none had been done at that point, looked at me and said, "You're going to get fired. You can't talk about that with 8th graders." Well, I went home, and the news that night was the first face transplant. So I said, "Can't fire me now. It's current events." But when we talk about a face transplant, I want you to think about the fact that a heart transplant can save your life, a liver transplant, a kidney transplant. But you can live with a face like this man had. You don't need a new face to survive. And everything that goes with a face transplant, from the years of anti-rejection drugs and the harm that they could cause you, to all of the stress caused, why would somebody undergo that? Why would they put themselves through that? And it came back. It was to feel more human. Not even just to not get stares in the street, but just to feel human. Same thing with the voice box that they have also transplanted. You've heard people speaking with those mechanical sounding voice boxes. They felt that they weren't human sounding. And so just for a voice box, they went through the problems and concerns about an operation to be able to sound more human. And so this is why I began to have the students think about this. Whether you're going to be a scientist or a taxpayer, a researcher, or someone who has a loved one who might need something like this, you need to consider these ideas. And there is humanity. This mother is listening to her deceased son's heart beating in a person whose life was saved because her son was willing to donate his heart after his death. Now we get beyond the idea of making somebody live and making somebody human, because plastic surgery actually began around World War I, when they were disfigured soldiers, and to make them more human, they began to work with their faces and try to give them a little bit more of a human appearance. But then, of course, what happens? People who were not disfigured began to think, now wait a minute. If he can be put back to normal, I'm already normal. Maybe I can be made to look better. So now the first thing that you think about when you hear plastic surgery are probably things like nose jobs and butt lifts. That's where it's gone to. Same thing now is happening with prosthetic devices. You could think of old pictures of, Peg Leg Pete and the pirates that just had a peg leg to walk on. We've come a long way with those prosthetic devices, to the point that we can now have a device like this that allows the person to move the hand just by thinking about it. You probably don't even think that that's a big deal right now, but when I first started and I was teaching, the students' minds were blown that a device could be moved by just thinking about it. And we have a student out who's actually teaching at Vanderbilt now who's working that whole idea. He develops bionic legs. And it's gotten to the point that they're even talking about whether there should be a separate Olympics for those people who have those extra special bionic legs. And then, of course, the military comes in, DARPA, and they talk about almost Iron Man suits that can help you lift more, run faster, and be protected. So things keep going rapidly, and the technology sometimes gets a little bit ahead of where we are ethically and cognitively. So, keep thinking. We look at, you've probably seen her, here she is on Jimmy Fallon. While we're developing these things that we can attach to people, we're also developing AI systems with algorithms that let the machine do machine learning and make themselves smarter. This is Sophia. She's a robot, but she's actually the first robotic citizen. She's a citizen of Saudi Arabia, interestingly enough, because they decided to do that to help promote the idea that Saudi Arabia, even though she wasn't developed there, cares about the future and cares about technology. So we see Sophia here, she was bantering back and forth with Jimmy Fallon. So you've got this idea of human development going on, and we did the genome mapping faster than anybody ever thought. At the same time, computers are getting smarter and smarter. And it's a race. Smarter computers, more mapping of the brain at this point, smarter computers, mapping of the brain. The point at which they meet, known now as the singularity, everything will change.
And we really need to think about that. There are people a little bit scared of the artificial intelligence being created, including Elon Musk and Stephen Hawking before him. And yet, the part that's really interesting is that human technology interface. We already have brain chips. We already have that connection. Are these people still human? I happen to be wearing contact lenses. If I didn't, I'd be falling off the stage. They're part of me. I'm still human, even though I have that part of me. So what will it mean to be human when your brain is interfaced directly to the cloud? And that will happen in your lifetime. You will be able to download things off the internet in real time. Now, I think some of you right now are already connected to your cell phones when I see people walking like this. It's like part of your body. But imagine if it were in your brain and you're directly accessing the internet. Imagine if you could access other people's brains at the same time and make a super brain. This sounds like science fiction, but so has everything else that I've seen from when I was a teenager developing till now. So really, what does it mean to be human? And how do human beings become involved in this? Even things like the self-driving cars that we're very familiar with in Pittsburgh become something we need to decide how we intervene as a human being. Right now, MIT is collecting thousands and thousands and thousands of surveys from people in over 200 countries to try to figure out an algorithm for how a self-driving car should operate. If it has to choose between running over a baby and an old lady, what should happen? And whose responsibility is that? If you are in an accident with a self-driving car, who gets sued? Is it you? Is it your insurance? Is it the car maker? Is it the person who wrote the program? How do we even write these programs? This is real things. These are real things that are happening right now. So MIT has been taking surveys, and it's about the machine survey, to pose to people, about a 20-minute survey, what would you do? And it's been very interesting to see that different cultures have different ideas about it. In Japan, they are much less likely to want to run over innocent pedestrians if they have to choose between people in the car and wiping out pedestrians. Americans and Europeans are much more likely to save younger people compared to older people. Asian nations are much more likely to save the older people. It goes back to a very famous philosophical problem posed about the famous trolley or streetcar problem, where imagine yourself where you're in a position that you cannot stop the streetcar, but you see it's running wildly towards 5 workmen who are innocently working. They have no idea the streetcar's about to run them over. You have a choice. You can pull the lever and send it off in another direction on a track where it will still wipe out one person, but just one. Do you let fate have its way and let it hit the 5 and do nothing, or do you pull the lever and have it hit one person? So they're posing things like this to see what our self-driving cars should do. And that is how we are involved in it. And they're thinking maybe kind of crowdsourcing or group control, all together we might come up with the best idea of how to program these cars. Now one thing though, to remind yourself of, who is most likely to be taking a 20-minute survey online? It turns out to be a lot of 20-year-old, white, young, well-educated men. Does that make a difference in how we program cars that are going to be sold in different countries? So this is all something you're going to be facing in your lifetime, no matter what career you'll have. So now we get on to what does it mean to be human in the increasingly technological society in which we find ourselves. And you're going to get to hear my view. I have purposely never shared that with my students over the years. I want them to do their own thinking. I play devil's advocate with them a lot, but I've never said what I think. And that doesn't mean I'm right. But after all of the years that I've spent thinking about this question, I'm coming up with 2 things that I think can differentiate human beings from algorithms, from AI, from very smart animals. One is that I think human beings are the only animals that live the majority of their lifetime knowing that that lifetime is finite. Now, we've heard about elephants that go off to the elephant graveyard when they feel the end is near, and even our own pets that have a sense that their time is about up. But they're not spending most of their lives knowing that there's an end point. That puts a burden on us. It's always there. But by the same token, the idea that our lives are finite allows us to experience something else, which I don't think animals can experience, and that is awe. What is awe? I don't even mean wonder, I mean awe. It's physical, it's cognitive, it's spiritual, it's sensory, it's everything together. It's that brief second in which you have this uncanny feeling that you kind of get the big picture, and it is life-changing. What triggers it? It could be something very natural, like seeing the aurora, seeing a newborn baby. It might be different for people, and it might change over time, but it's that very special feeling. And they've even done research to show that those who experience more awe in their lives are the ones who seem to be better balanced mentally, who seem to be inspired more to create great things, and to just, in general, be more satisfied and eager to continue with doing wonderful things in that finite life. How can we experience more awe? Well, perhaps we can go outdoors more, we can engage ourselves in new passions, we can look for new things, come to experiences like TEDx talks. It's always there. Just make sure you look for it, because it will guide you and it will help you to experience the awe that the astronauts experienced the first time they saw our planet Earth. It's called the overview effect, when they realize both how fragile and how unified the Earth is, that blue marble hanging in space. They've all experienced it. They're never the same again. Just the idea that every human being they've ever loved, every experience they've ever had, every accomplishment they've ever done is all there on that blue marble hanging in space. But you too can experience awe, from the double rainbow, if any of you saw that the other day, to, again, watching a newborn, watching something that truly inspires you. So I would like to leave you with these thoughts. Remember today's theme for our TEDx Thoughts is power. I want you to think that in your finite life, the more awe you can experience, the more power you'll have to make a positive difference on this planet. Thank you.